Welcome back to Learning Matters. I'm Doug Wooldridge, your host, and today we have Tarrel Pierson of Navigant Learning on the show to tell us about his journey in L&D, as well as all the exciting things that Navigant Learning has to offer. Let's get to the show. Thanks so much for joining the podcast with us today, Tarrel. I just want to start off with the first question, and I'd like to know how you got yourself into the world of learning and development to begin with.
So I have a bit of an unorthodox journey. I spent about 9 years of my early life working in the scuba diving industry.
No kidding. All right.
No kidding. Believe it or not, here in Colorado.
PADI certified, by the way. Ready to
Fantastic.
go out with you on the dive boat any chance I get.
Used to be a certified instructor. I'm no longer, but still love to dive. But, after those 9 years and getting married and thinking about having kids, decided I maybe needed more of a professional career ahead of me. And so
Sure.
I actually had a friend of mine who was starting early .com era, starting a business around sales order management for outdoor industry. So his clients were North Face and Marmot and places like that.
Sweet.
And asked me to join the team. And because out of, our 20 or so employees, I was the only one with an English major. I kind of got elected to do everything that had to do with communications.
There you go.
So I was, the training guy, but I was also marketing and sales, and just,
Oh man,
at
so
the
many
trade
hats.
shows and all those hats, right? Because, the other guys didn't want to have to talk to customers. So I sort of took that over. So I taught myself, from that point, really, instructional design and did a lot of reading up on adult learning theory and things like that, and kind of just taught myself to do it out of necessity, and use the tools of necessity. I think I was customer number in the teens for WebEx, and actually used WebEx to create my training. I would record myself on WebEx and then put that out on a little CD to do training. And eventually I was contacted by someone doing recruiting for Accenture, and way back then Accenture, well, they still do. They had a business process outsourcing group called Accenture Learning, which specialized, a big group of learning people, and they brought me in to do learning work there. And so that was the formal start of my instructional design career, is actually having the title instructional designer and working on that team. I then, branched out into more the consulting piece of Accenture, and, did the old road warrior thing, being out on the road 4 or 5 days a week. As a consultant in the learning space, and did that for quite a few years until one of our clients hired me away, and I did some work in sales enablement in the tech industry, and I sort of just expanded the kinds of learning and the types of participants that were a part of the learning, and then kind of worked my way back to consulting, doing some work with NTT and Korn Ferry before deciding to, do my own thing. I actually had a longtime colleague of mine that we had probably been talking about starting our own business for the past at least 10 years. And just, kept hesitating and thinking, the time's not right, or a little bit of cold feet, right? Doing your own thing. And finally, one day we kind of had the realization that, we were at the point where we were teaching the companies that we worked for how to do the things we knew anyway. So we might as well just, offer that as our own business. And so that's when we decided to start Navigant Learning.
That's incredible. And to me, you guys do a lot of different offerings. So can you kind of give our audience just a little bit of a breakdown of what type of offerings that Navigant provides for clients?
Yeah, so it's really kind of 3 distinct pieces of Navigant Learning. The first part, and really what got us started, was the fractional consulting piece. And for those that aren't familiar with fractional consulting, it's pretty much what it sounds like, I guess. It's rather than full-time employment or doing full-time contracting work, it's the opportunity for companies to hire us to do kind of like part-time work. So companies that may need a chief learning officer or a director of learning, something like that, but really aren't in the position or don't have the need to have them, 40 hours a week, can bring us in to do 10, 20, 30 hours, whatever makes sense for that particular client. And then we're also able to do that same service for multiple clients. It's something that's been around for a while, especially like for, chief finance officers and even,
Sure.
Chief HR officers and things like that has been a space where people have leveraged the fractional model, but it's a little bit new for the learning space. So we feel like we were kind of getting in on the front end of being learning specialized in the fractional space.
Definitely, I would say that it is quite a new thought process for clients. Things change overnight in all sorts of industries. Thanks to COVID, we know that we have to be just as flexible. So I think that it's a really brilliant idea to bring that into this space because it gives flexibility to the client, but it also gives you the flexibility to really kind of delve into what their actual needs are. So were you kind of doing this type of stuff from the consulting side of things, and that's how you and your partner came together and be like, actually, we can make a true business out of this?
We were in kind of a different way. So in some instances, we were really, full-time focused on one specific part of strategy in the learning space with the companies that we were working for. But oftentimes, in consulting, you're on projects and because sort of as you move up the ranks, you're often on multiple projects. That's sort of the way that consulting works out. So in some ways, we're kind of already doing it, right? We're already, supervising and providing, oversight over multiple projects anyway. So we sort of had that, talent developed already to be able to manage across multiple clients and projects. And so it kind of is not a huge transition to do it just, for ourselves rather than as part of a larger consulting company.
Definitely. And I'm going to kind of get into a little bit of XR, which is also one of your guys' focus. But how has new technology like AI, VR, and AR kind of changed your approach to how you develop training?
It's sort of twofold. So there's the impact on how we deliver and the impact on how we develop, right? Yep. So especially with AI, but to a lesser degree with VR or XR as well. But certainly from the training standpoint, from what we deliver to clients on the XR and VR side, we do a lot. What's really changed about it is that full immersive experience and actually delivering kind of two types of VR. One where it's sort of more of a metaverse space and it's sort of set up to allow them to participate much like you would in a classroom or a live session. Sure. You're doing it in a metaverse, right? Either 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional, which is nice. We've seen clients use it for doing things like, stand-up agile meetings and things like that to doing whiteboarding and design thinking sessions, all kinds of things in those metaverse spaces. But then there's also the more, I guess you might think of more like a video game type of immersive experience where there's sort of a set simulation or experience that you go through. And we're seeing that in a lot of different spaces. A lot of use in government work, believe it or not. Makes sense from the standpoint of, I think originally it was a lot of tactical stuff. So if you think of things where people needed to learn things hands-on, VR made good sense because it kind of is a tactical thing anyway. And it allowed people to shift from having to have everybody on site because you could do maybe more of it virtually. But we really actually, there's studies out there that found it's actually more engaging. And because it's more engaging and more immersed, you have less distractions, so you learn faster. So there's a lot of advantages to doing in that space. And for companies that work in either dangerous situations or for companies, a good example is like manufacturing, some things you have to teach people to do. You don't want to shut down the manufacturing line.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You want to keep it, you'd rather train them and keep it going because that's money. So, for those kind of things where you needed to have an alternate space to either be safer or not have to shut down production, VR is something that, is really picked up well. And there's actually quite a bit of even now off the shelf material that we'll leverage as well and maybe customize. Some interesting new spaces though that I've seen really recently or fairly recently is looking at VR for doing things like DEI training, diversity training and leadership training, difficult conversations, places where people need or can take advantage of being in a virtual, safe environment to go through those experiences
Yeah.
and learn about those things, where you're working with maybe an avatar, or at least the feeling that you're not just standing up in front of your peers and making mistakes, right?
I love the idea of having a sandbox where I can make all the mistakes possible out there before I go screw up in front of my peers. That's
Absolutely.
definitely appealing to me.
Much less intimidating. And so I think people will take risks in the environment, which is good for learning. The more risks you take, then the more you kind of learn. The
Definitely.
last space that's really interesting to me is in data visualization. So seeing companies put their data and make it three-dimensional and work with it in a three-dimensional space, because from a psychological perspective, it helps to work with the data when you can visualize it. So they'll 3D visualize the data and work with it that way. So some real interesting current developments with VR.
Yeah. So, how are you able to take that data and bring it back to your training programs? And this type of data, I would imagine, is quite a bit different from the type of data that we were getting from like classroom settings or just standard e-learning, microlearning. How are you using that data to showcase what success means for these programs?
What's really interesting is that it really allows you to track data in a way that you never have before. Because if you think about it, in that virtual environment, like on our computers, we can track anything that you do, right? So
Mm-hmm.
movements can be tracked, dialogue can be tracked, decisions and choices can be tracked. All these things can be tracked in that virtual space. So you have just a tremendous amount of data that you can now look at. So if you think about my example, like the manufacturing plants, they can literally be looking at how people are moving through the exercise and change the process based on where they can see glitches. Hey, maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
taking too long for them to do it a certain way. They can notice those trends and see those things happening and make changes to the process or to the system based on what they're seeing in those training environments. So there's just, it's this whole new world of not just, and we always joke in the industry, it's hard to get anything but sort of smile sheet data, right? They can tell me they liked it,
Yeah,
things like that. But it's really hard to get data that says, well, how well did it work? And do we actually see behavior change, being demonstrated within the context of the learning activity itself? And so in those virtual environments, because we can track so much, we can actually start to see and track some of those changes and those behavior changes live as people are going through the
yeah.
training.
And are you
Yeah.
parsing through a lot of that data as a team, or are you using subject
Sure.
matter experts to really go through and have them be like, actually, this is where we need changes in this, and this is where we find maybe potential issues or successes?
I would love to say it was me and I was that smart, but it's really the subject matter experts. So we work, hand in hand to understand what they might be looking at. And it
Mhm.
does change the initial dynamic, right? Because there's a lot more discovery and really understanding
Yeah.
what they might be looking for, so that you can be sure to, set the experience up so that you can track those things. And so, yeah, once we get the data, it's really leveraging the experts to analyze and so forth. Maybe someday, as I do more and more of this, I'll get to where I can do a little bit more on my own.
Well, that's the beauty of us being in this industry. We can be experts in a whole lot of different things, or at least have a tertiary knowledge enough to be able to hold the conversation. And, well, that's why it's important to choose the best subject matter experts that you can to help out learning companies and get a successful training program in process.
For sure.
So, what's your type of approach when it comes to discussing these type of programs with, let's say, a Fortune 500 company? There's always, I would imagine, a little bit of sticker shock when it comes to these more immersive type of things. Anytime that really serious gaming is a part of the training program, it does take quite a bit of time. It takes a lot of expertise. How are you approaching it with clients, or are they already kind of getting into that realm now of where they see the importance of the technology that's available to them today and how it can really make things a lot quicker? Like you were saying, it's better retention. It's a much quicker aspect, and you don't have to shut down production when it comes to things like manufacturing. How are you proposing these things to clients?
The reactions really run the gamut, right? Because it's anywhere from folks who are very skeptical of the technology
Sure.
and its ability, and sort of look at it as a bit gimmicky, right?
Oh
Hey,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
looks
yeah.
cool. You can do it, virtually, but what do you really get out of it, right? There's others that are very on board, right? It goes to
Mhm.
those who come to us and say, hey, we've been seeing some of our competitors, we've seen other spaces where they're using this technology and having great success. How can we use it? For me, it's a lot of discovery and working with the customer to really first figure out what they're trying to solve, because then I think the solution makes more sense, right? So if we
Mhm.
spend the time
Yeah.
really trying to understand what it is they're trying to do, what the training is trying to solve for, then when we propose a solution that includes something like XR technology, it makes a lot more sense because it's specifically addressing the issue that they're trying to solve for.
Definitely. And uh, once you get a training program installed, what has kind of been the initial thoughts from the learner's standpoint? Because we always want to please the client, but how is the learner taking in these new style of approaches? Does it? You talked a little bit about the success earlier, but how does retention change for these type of immersive programs, and how are they able to walk into confidence into, let's say, the first actual day on the job without having some type of training behind them, without leaving the sandbox and going into the actual deep end?
Yeah, so for a lot of these experiences, the XR experience acts as more as the primer, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we're able to, through those experience, get them introduced to the concepts, understand the basic motions and the processes and things like that. But it isn't a complete substitute for still the old school practical experience.
Sure.
If you think of one of the experiences we were working on with the client, actually involved showing people how to intubate a patient, which is a scary, complex
Very
process to
scary.
go through if you've never.
Has
And
never made. I love watching old episodes of ER and like House and even MASH and stuff, because intubation seems to be the most difficult process that they possibly deal with. It's always the scariest for new timers. So yeah, sorry for that aside.
No, it's one of those things, and again, it kind of actually, this is a good way of talking about how you learn so much more in that immersive environment. Like you, when I first did the experience, I knew nothing about intubation. I'm not a nurse. I don't do any of these kind of things, and immediately you gain an appreciation for the complexity of it, how tricky it is to get in there without further injuring the patient,
Mm-hmm.
how time sensitive it is, and literally the experience we had a clock ticking down,
Oh
so that
no.
basically saying, like, if you don't do it by this time, you're going to lose the patient.
Oh gosh.
So really, by having that experience, it is more intense. I don't think that watching it, in a video or on a flat screen gives you that sense of time and space, that being
Yeah.
fully immersed in it and experiencing it with your coworkers and fumbling to get things in place together and do the activity. It's really hard to do that in any other way than sort of that immersed 3D experience. And then I think what that can do for then the learners is, even though they will still need to do those things and practice those things in a more real life experience, at least they're oriented, right? They have a better sense for what's involved, and so when they get to that point, there's less time needed in that live
Right.
environment. Yeah.
So you're a little bit less stressed. I mean, the stress level's still there, but you're like, I got this. I've done this 40. It's like being in a flight simulator. Ultimately, is that you get out of that and you're like, I've seen this, I've been through this, and I'm able to just. We may be winging it a little bit, but we're gonna make this work.
Exactly.
So you've been really on the vanguard of a lot of the technical and from software and hardware advances within this industry. Where do you think we're headed in the next couple of years?
Especially going back to our the topic of AI, I think it will have a big impact on the industry, but maybe not so much in the way that a lot of people fear. I think there's a lot of fear that AI can do this and that and can replace your jobs. And there's a lot of technology that's being introduced that, admittedly they do market themselves that way, right? One click and
Sure.
you're going to create
Yeah.
your learning. And I think the reality is, like so many things in the past, that it will very much change the exact process that we use, and it will make certain parts of it take less of our time. You talked about subject matter experts. One of the difficult parts of the learning industry is always that since I'm not an expert, I rely on somebody, which means I rely on their time. And often from the client standpoint, they don't want to have to sacrifice all that time, because their subject matter experts are also people they need doing the work, right? So if we using AI really allows us the ability to get much further into the process, to have better developed storyboards and scripts and things like this that we can then take to those experts, more fully realize and require less of their time to validate.
Yeah.
So that's a huge part of it. If you just think about the amount of time, we actually did some experimentation with a partner company of ours, and we really just ran the standard kind of ADDIE, development process that you hear about a lot. But we introduced AI where we thought it could save some time, especially in the design process and the storyboarding process. And we're really able to determine that, based on comparing it to kind of the standard time to develop, instructor-led PowerPoint training type of things, it saved about 41% of the time.
Wow, that's incredible. That's significant.
It's a big deal, right? That's less a burden on the subject matter expert, but it also ultimately it's cost saving, because you're spending less time developing everything, less instructional design hours, which is allows you to keep your costs down. And the benefit to companies like mine is that I'm not sacrificing the margin and so forth. I'm just being more efficient with my time, right? So everybody's kind of happy in the end. Client saves money, right? Because they're spending less. They don't have to pay for as many hours. But I'm not losing money hand over fist either, because I'm able to actually still be profitable from the standpoint, and be able to provide really good quality training on top of it, right? Because the focus then becomes not spending hours and hours reading manuals to figure out what's important to put in the training, but instead thinking about, okay, well, how do I make that even more engaging? What else could I do to make that more engaging, right?
The fun side of things.
Exactly, the fun part.
Exactly. And as someone who is seems like very well tapped into the wellspring of knowledge here in the ever-changing world of learning and development and corporate training in general, how do you keep up with the ever-changing aspect of this industry?
It's tough. I mean, not only is it ever changing, but it's very fragmented. It isn't like some industries where there's just a dominant player in one kind of technology, right? There's so many. I think I used to have a slide where I talked about being, 750 companies that advertise having some sort of learning library available to you. There's, I think if you Google it, there's something like 30,000 companies that will say they do some kind of learning and development or training.
Sure.
It's just crazy, right? It's really hard to keep up with. And so the way I keep up, part of it is just staying connected with your peer network. I mean, the nice thing about this industry is there aren't a lot of big egos. And I think it's really easy to talk with people and network. And even when we're in competing companies or working for different companies, it's a great, community of people that share, and we can talk to each other and learn a lot from each other. But the other way is, going back to the AI thing, is we're starting to leverage AI as a way to keep track of what's going on out there, and kind of do, see what the new companies are that we should take a look at, do summaries and things like that. So we kind of wrap our head around features and things like that. But I can tell you, it's a lot to keep up with. And all the time I'll be talking to a client and they'll mention the name of a company that I've never heard of. So I have to quickly look it up.
I believe it. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I can't wait to see where Navigant Learning goes in the future. You guys have only been around for a couple months now. April, is that right? When the launch happened?
Officially April, yeah.
All right. Very exciting. Before I get you out of here, I have one more question for you. So,
okay.
We talked just a little bit about success earlier, and there's a lot of different ways to define success, whether that's your client is happy with what you've come up with, whether you're happy with what you've come up with, and, whether the instructional designer is happy with what they came up with. What is the one thing that you hope learners take away from the training that you guys produce?
I mean, there's the kind of the short and hopefully not too corporate of answer is we hope the client's happy with, in the end is happy with what we deliver. But for me personally, I come from a long line of teachers and politicians, and we've always been about public service.
A dangerous duo.
I know, a very dangerous duo. Right? But for me, the reason I wanted to do, my own thing and branch out and have my own businesses, I really wanted to be able to focus on, in the end, what I do, I hope makes a positive impact in people's lives, that people can learn something new that either helps them get a promotion or helps them to do their job in a way that allows them more free time to spend with their family, whatever it is. The ultimate impact should be, can we make people's lives better? And I mean that sincerely. Of course, we want to make enough money to keep doing what we're doing and things like that.
Sure.
But really, in the end, it's sort of the old, what do you want on your gravestone? I made a lot of money selling learning, or hey, I changed people's lives, right? So in the end, for me, it's always about, can I be like my parents? Can I look back and say, hey, look at all the lives I impacted? And that's really what it's about.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tarrel, for this incredible conversation. Like I said, I wish you guys the best and hope to have you on again sometime in the future, because I'd just like to pick your brain a little bit more on some XR stuff and some of the exciting technology that we have offered to us in this industry. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And anytime, you can tell I like talking about this stuff. So,
all right. Well, thanks, brother.
All right, thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us this week. As always, like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter, The Buzz, to keep up with all things L&D. See you next time.